Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this important discussion and meeting to look at this new e-visa system. As many of us know, and I know there are many people who don't know, many of my friends who I mentioned to them actually had no idea. From the beginning of January, we no longer be able to use any physical proof to evidence our, visa or right to stay immigration status in UK. Those stamps on our passport, the biometric residence and permit, they all will disappear, and we all are meant to go now have this online e-visa. There are some exceptions, of course, and I'm delighted that today with us we have an amazing group of experts who will help us with the discussion and will help us, navigate this maze and this maze of confusions, because we're expecting to have lots of confusions, and lots of people will be confused because now we're going to have too many different systems. So it's important that we get together right now before we reach the deadline and we understand a little bit more about the implications of this change into e-visa only, and some of the risks associated to that, and how do we prepare ourselves and to avoid, getting into trouble, and as a result. But also, we also want to learn from colleagues and organizations who worked on similar schemes in the past, like the one when the right to rent checks were introduced, or right to work checks were introduced. Also, again, very recently, EU citizens who have their status under the EU settlement scheme, how they had to prove that they have the right to be here when maybe crossing borders and traveling, and etc. So I think it's a very important a conversation for us, and of course we have a lot of concerns, and many people do, not just Migrant Voice and all the partner organizations who joined us today. Some of them is what happened, if people are can't approve or evidence their immigration status. And we will hear later from colleagues to share with us some of the learning from the Windrush. Again, there are lots of issues. Again, we learned from some of the issues like the right to checks, right to rents, and how some people lost their employment as a result. I mean, I think this is the right time to learn from all those different schemes and processes. So we are better informed, and we don't face discrimination, exploitation, you name it. I think it's important now we understand the situation better and we avoid it. But as I said, I'm delighted to help us with the conversation. We have an amazing group of experts, which I'll introduce them shortly.
I'm just delighted that you're all here to talk about not just the imminent change to e-visas, but the wider context and issues with having to apply again for the rights that the status that we already have, and learning, as you said, Nazik, from the lessons from the past, and to talk about the wider context of digital only status.
Thank you, Anne. So I'm going to go straight to my first guest, the amazing Zoe Bantleman. Zoe, many of you know her, of course, met her a few times at Migrant Voice and other places. She's a legal director at ILPA, and she will give us an overview of what the new policy means in practice for individuals who are moving into digital immigration status. So Zoe, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nazik, and thank you to Migrant Voice for arranging and hosting this excellent event on e-visas and digital status. I'm just going to begin by providing some context and then move on to talking through some of our concerns and our recommendations in very broad strokes. As you all know, biometric residence permits, BRPs, in addition to stamps and stickers and passports, are the current pieces of hard proof that millions of migrants in the UK have to show their migration status. Right now, you can use these permits in order to create a code that shares information about your immigration status with your employer or your landlord. but you also still have that physical piece of documentation, and that gives all of us a sense of security. When I had one, I carried my BRP with me everywhere. My family members still do. And in this hostile culture that we have in the UK that produces fear really in all of us migrants, it's important to be able to prove your right to be here at any time, to show it to airlines, to border officials, to anyone who wants to see it really. However, all of these BRPs are going to expire in just over 6 months, even if migrants have permission to be in the UK in 2025 and 2026 and beyond, even if they have permission to be here indefinitely. In 2020, the Home Office took the decision to short date biometric residence permits so that they expire at the end of this year on the 31st of December, 2024. At first, it was because permits didn't incorporate the next generation of encryption technology, which was required by the European Union. But even when that restriction was lifted, the UK decided to continue issuing these short-dated BRPs, including for people with indefinite leave. And that's because the Home Office wanted to move to a digital immigration system. Now, this digital-only form of immigration status has begun to be rolled out in the past few years, but there have been many technological problems and teething issues, not all of which have been resolved by the Home Office. EU settlement scheme individuals were the first to have digital status and the first to have these issues, which my brilliant colleague Monique is going to discuss in a moment. In addition to the EU settlement scheme, people on the Hong Kong British National Overseas route, some students and workers who applied on the UK Immigration ID Check app were also issued with this digital-only immigration status. This means they have a UK VI account to access their e-visa as their only proof of their immigration status. However, there are still millions of migrants in the UK who were not granted this e-visa from the get-go, who will now, to avoid any gap in their proof of status, need to create an online UK VI account with the Home Office before the end of this year. Now, in spring of this year, the Home Office started emailing people listed as contacts on application forms. Sometimes that's a family member that's listed as a contact, sometimes a friend, a legal representative, or sometimes the applicant themselves. And those emails contained a unique link to set up a UK VI account. Unfortunately, lots of these emails didn't even contain the most basic identification details as to who the email was for. It didn't have a first name, it didn't have any digits of a reference number, a BRP number. So many legal representatives, for example, didn't know who the email or the unique link was for. We at ILPA wrote to the Home Office about this in March, and they still haven't fixed the issue. This is despite the fact that a legal representative may have helped and been the contact for many hundreds, if not thousands, of migrants. The Home Office told us that this June, which we're now coming to the end of, they were going to make it possible for all people with BRPs to set up UK VI accounts and access their e-visas. This still hasn't happened. We hope it's going to go live soon so that people can try to access their e-visa and set up the account before the end of this year, but we just don't know when it's going to be released. Now, I think it's really important to highlight that the Home Office has had 5 years to prepare for the phasing out of biometric residence permits. But here we are 6 months away from the cliff edge deadline of the end of this year, and there's still insufficient plans in place. Now, given the poor reach of the Home Office on communications on this issue and issues in the past, it's fair to assume we think that there will be thousands of people who don't apply for an e-visa account in time. And it will only be at the moment that a person is likely to urgently need to prove their permission to be in the UK that they'll realize something has gone wrong and they don't actually have that proof. Their inability to prove their immigration status may result in them losing a home they wish to rent, being passed over for a job or role, being unable to travel or to return to the UK, including to be with family or to return to their home, school, or job. Now, the Home Office has no backup plan in place, really, no safety net for people who cannot comply or who are unable to comply by the cutoff date of the end of this year. We've written to the Home Office in an open letter signed by 230 practitioners, advisors, frontline workers, experts, organizations, including ones on this call, explaining our joint concerns, and there's 5 of them. First, there's a lack of joined up thinking by the Home Office about the numerous new digital systems that are being rolled out. Like there's also electronic travel authorizations for all visitors that they want to introduce to the UK. And they now have a new digital way of communicating with airlines. Second, there's no transitional period after the end of this year. Let's remember that the Home Office has created this date, it self-imposed this date as a cliff edge deadline, but people will have expired BRPs, which carriers aren't going to accept next year, and that may result in them being unable to return to the UK. We're worried that this is going to be a situation like Windrush, where people have the ability to enter, live, rent, and work here, but they just can't prove it. The third concern we have is that we've already seen people have trouble proving their immigration status. All of these new systems need to work perfectly. If they don't, even a small percentage of error is going to affect thousands of migrants. And now we've all seen recently what can happen with faulty software with the Horizon Post Office scandal. So imagine that here. The fourth concern we have is that the people who are most likely to be affected when the 1st of January comes next year are vulnerable people, people with disabilities, learning difficulties, language barriers, age barriers, children, young people in care, people who have been victims of abuse and other crimes. And these migrants are less likely to have access to smartphones or to the internet on which the entire e-visa system is based. And that means that they risk falling into the hostile environment much more easily. Now, we've all seen in our day-to-day life how difficult the move to contactless only cards has been, for example, for the elderly in the UK. This digital immigration status will be hard on them, but also on individuals who are digitally excluded because they just won't be able to set up that account by themselves. And the Home Office is only now thinking about providing some grant funding to see which organizations can help vulnerable migrants. And the fifth concern that we have is communication is poor, and the Home Office hasn't been taking on board our feedback, even though they have said that they've been consulting us. So we've made 4 recommendations. The first is that until it's certain that every person can prove and access their status in any circumstance that they need it without technological error, the Home Office must accept those expired physical pieces of evidence of immigration status and or issue new physical evidence of status. Our second recommendation is that they have to meaningfully engage with us stakeholders, but also with migrants through tailored personalized communication and actually learn the lessons from the EU settlement scheme and from Windrush. The third is that we really need a 24/7 free helpline with translation services that's available both in the UK and overseas to migrants, carriers, employers, landlords, anyone who needs to resolve issues with status and the move to e-visas and proof of it. Finally, in the medium term, we've endorsed the 3 Millions recommendation for a digital token akin to the QR codes that we all used during COVID, which can be accessed without internet connection and can be printed out. So you do have something physical with you at all times. In the meantime, we're hoping that all of you can help us spread the word, beat the drum, hold the government to account, and try to have these recommendations implemented by a new government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you. And just to repeat that we let the speakers present first, and then we'll look at the questions and try to answer them. So I'm going to go straight to the next guest, also the amazing Monique Hawkins, who's a policy and research officer at the 3 Millions. Monique will speak about the lessons from the implementation of digital status in the settlement scheme. So
thank you. Thanks very much, Nazak, and I echo Zoe's thanks for setting up this very, very timely webinar. So yeah, just to make it clear that I'm talking about a cohort who already have e-visas because they were given e-visas as part of the applying to the EU settlement scheme status. So what I'm going to talk about is the errors that the problems that people have had even once they have an e-visa, and the problems that can happen downstream from that. And as Zoe said, the EUSS really was like a guinea pig for the whole digital-only trial. It all started to bite on the 1st of July 2021, because that's when there was a grace period. Up to then, that was the first time that people had to rely on this digital-only status. We did try to actually initiate a legal case in February 2021, but the judges judged that premature, and they said, oh, you don't know how bad it's going to be, and the Home Office is going to put in place all sorts of mitigation. The only mitigation that has been put in place is a helpline, and we've seen a lot of problems with that helpline. So I want to just, I mean, Zoe sort of alluded to it, but I want to just explain the difference between what we consider a digital status versus what this is, which we think is more like an online process. So a digital status, I would think something like the COVID pass, you know, something you have in an app, which it belongs to you. It doesn't matter whether you've got internet, whether you're abroad, whether you've got Wi-Fi or anything like that. You can just switch it on and show it to someone. If you feel insecure about it, as I often do when I've got a boarding cards work in the same way, I can print it off, and it's you know, secured by a QR code, and you can print one off yourself. You could easily imagine situations where they can make provision for people who don't have smartphones to give them a card with that code on it. So there's all sorts of solutions there. So that's a digital status that sits with the individual. Whereas what this e-visa gives you, in order to prove your status to someone, I suppose lots of people will have used it already if they've tried to prove their right to work or right to rent, but you have to input your details onto a government website. It has to send you a security code that will be sent to your phone or to your email. If you had someone who originally helped you to set up your account, an organization or a charity might have used their email or their phone, so you're not going to get that authentication code. If you're lucky, the authentication code comes to you, you then put that in, then you see your status. Then you press more buttons to say, I want to share my status, and you can choose whether you want to share it for work, rent, or something else. Then you get given a 9-character security code, share code, sorry. You give that share code to the person who wants to check it along with your date of birth. They then have to find the correct other website to put it in, because they can choose the wrong one, but they find the correct site, put that in with your date of birth, and then they get told, yes, this person has permission. So we've always been worried about three sort of cohorts, really. First of all, the cohort that Zoe was also alluding to, which is people for whom a digital status like this will never work because they lack smartphones, they lack digital literacy, you know, they are just not able to do this. Secondly, there's a cohort of people who in principle are fine using digital technology, but who suffer a technical glitch on the Home Office databases. And you might have seen earlier this year, there was a Guardian article about, there was a whistleblower from the Home Office. There were 76,000 records on there, which with so-called merged identities. And we've been emailing the Home Office about that since August 2022, because people came to us and said, I have just logged on with my passport, and imagine my shock where I didn't see my own photograph, but I saw a complete stranger's photograph. So obviously, if that happens to you and you see someone else's name or someone else's status or someone else's photograph, it won't function as a right to work, because the employer will say, well, that's not you. That doesn't give me a statutory excuse. I can't employ you. And then the third sort of thing that we're worried about is just circumstances in which it works for no one. So when there is no Wi-Fi, when there is no broadband, when you're abroad, when systems don't work and you're abroad, and there's a whole queue of airline people trying to check in to a plane. Imagine if everyone had to go through this cumbersome process. So we've seen, I mean, we feel that obviously the government has to learn the lessons from the EU settlement scheme, and we think they've done anything, but we have seen problems with people losing jobs, losing job opportunities, missing out on places to rent. We've seen lots of people denied boarding. We've seen people struggling to get driving licenses or renewal of driving license. We've been seeing people refuse bank accounts, refused mortgages, refuse student finance, having trouble persuading a university that they do have the right to enroll. And so, yeah, there is this alternative that we've proposed based on a QR code. And at times, the Home Office have indicated that they're willing to engage with us on it, and then they've sort of slammed it all shut again. Their bottom line is that they really want to have a system that is operating in real time, because they don't want to run the risk that for even one day, you produce a code that says, I have the right to work, when in the meantime they've revoked it. We think that comes at an enormous cost. It's not necessary, it's not sensible. And I just want to talk about my final point. We've just, together with ILPA, we have launched a website called www.evisa-problems.org.uk. I can't put it in the chat, I don't think, but maybe somebody else can, where there's a very simple reporting form. And we'd encourage anyone who has any problems, or even if you're working on behalf of your clients, please just to log it. We're not promising that we're going to be able to get back to anyone, but by building an evidence base, it's really, really going to help us in all our joint advocacy. And if any other organizations want to have their logos added to this page, please talk to us. We can talk about sharing data on a completely anonymized basis. We will be the data controller, so we will be fulfilling GDPR. Any data we share will have all identifying information stripped from it. But please contact us if you want to be a part of this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Monique. So we started to see some of the solutions as well. We're not only discussing issues and barriers. Thank you for that. Thank you. So I'd like to move now next to the wonderful Bethan Land. Bethan is the Advocacy and Development Manager at Praxis. And Bethan will speak about how the move to digital status is affecting the communities her organization is working with.
Thank you, Nazak. Yeah. So I was asked today to say a little bit about how this proposal might impact the most vulnerable groups, some of the particular groups that we work with. And I struggled a little bit with what to say, because I was trying to find something to say that doesn't seem to be blindingly obvious to everyone except the Home Office. And I think this is part of the problem that we're having. Most of what we say as immigration representatives who are used to dealing with this on a daily basis, is blindingly obvious to us what the problems with this system are, but trying to explain them to the Home Office seems to be extremely hard work. A number of people here have already said, the digital immigration system as such is not new. We've seen it used for the EU settlement scheme cohort. We've seen it used for the Hong Kong BNOs. And we know already, as Monique's just alluded to, that even then there have been significant difficulties for people in accessing the system or in setting it up in the first place, because they had problems accessing passports or ID documents in order to actually get their status sorted out. And yet, if you think about it, the EU cohort and the Hong Kong cohorts generally have significantly better literacy and digital literacy than a lot of the other groups that we're working with, who the digital scheme will now be extended to. The digital divide is very real. I work regularly with clients making various applications on their behalf, and I am often told, yes, I'll send you a copy of my digital bank statement when I get home, because I will need to ask my son to help me to do that. Oh, you want me to log on to my universal credit account? Let me just message my friend, because they know what my username and password is, but I don't actually know that. Or instead of providing me a digital document, I get lots of screenshots from their mobile phone of something that they've looked at online and then managed to take screenshots of, but couldn't actually download or access themselves. So we see lots of people who struggle with quite basic digital literacy and are unable to operate the systems on a day-to-day basis. Now, I've also noticed that many of my clients who are dealing with these kind of things also are very, very, very vulnerable to hacking and fraud issues with their digital systems, because they struggle to recognize phishing attempts and hacking attempts and malware and these kind of things. So they're often very, very prone to downloading malware and things onto their devices, because they just don't recognize the issues and their security for bank accounts and all kinds of things is breached. So extend that to having the security of your immigration status breached and someone getting into it and changing the details there so that they can access it from different phones and with different documents. And it gives you a kind of idea of some of the possible exploitation and issues which might come when people who are not digitally experienced have to start using digital status. In addition, we do lots of work with destitute migrants, people who are trying to obtain status for the first time. And we often have problems in making applications because people can't obtain a passport. They don't have the money to try and obtain a passport. They may not have any other form of photo ID. And then we have to go through the dance of persuading the Home Office that it's not reasonable for that applicant to actually get a a passport, to have a photo ID, and that we can use other means of evidencing their status so that we can get them immigration status to begin with. If you need some kind of document in order to access your UK VI account, that's going to add another step and another barrier to overcome, even if we can manage to get people's status. So it's going to make the whole process longer, more complicated, more difficult to navigate for people who are already destitute and need to get their status issues sorted out as quickly as possible. I was also thinking of another example of some of the clients we work with who've experienced domestic abuse and who flee situations of domestic abuse. And quite often, as part of leaving that situation, they have to give up their mobile phone number. They often change their email address because their email may have been compromised by their abusive family member. So again, we'll be working with people in situations of extreme urgency where they may now be unable to access a document if it's connected to a telephone number, to an email account, which has been compromised by someone else. It says on the gov.uk website, when you look at all the stuff around the benefits of e-visas, it talks about it being quicker and easier for the person to evidence their status to third parties if they have an e-visa. I still do not understand in what way logging into your email account or on your online UK VI account with the right document and your mobile phone to hand, remembering your password, probably having to pass secondary verification, obtaining a share code, sending that to another person, and then that other person having to find the right place to log into and submit that share code to see your status is in any way quicker than just showing someone your biometric residence permit. And we know that in many, many instances, proving your immigration status is time critical. It's been referenced several times already by some of the speakers in terms of securing a job, securing housing, possibly accessing health service in emergency. Most of our clients tend to be in fairly insecure work, often working 0 hours, and it's already an issue that when they're making an application for extension, they often get suspended temporarily. Their employer will not give them work temporarily because they want to make sure, first of all, that this person can still work. Again, if they have to go through this process and they experience any difficulties or there's something wrong with their online status, then their employers are going to stop them from working during that period and they will lose wages, they will lose money while that happens. I was very interested to note, again, when the Home Office put out their terms and conditions for the use of these e-visas, this digital status, they included a clause saying that they take no liability for any problems, loss, or anything else related to the use of a UK VI account and e-visas. So it seems already that they are protecting themselves from the problems that we know will happen. The support which is being proposed in order to allow organisations to help people to set up these accounts is absolutely risible. It's a tiny amount. It's just, as they've been put out now, the offer. So it's unlikely to get to any organisations for some time. So there's going to be a huge delay in organisations being able to help people to set up accounts. And we are fairly confident that once people start setting up accounts, there will be connected immigration issues which will need tackling if people are going to be able to progress to the situation of setting up an account. And often the organisations who get the funding to help them to do that won't be able to tackle that. When you design a system like this, which is supposed to work for a large, diverse group of users, you need to thoroughly understand the potential issues and design the system with the most vulnerable in mind. Nothing we've heard from the Home Office so far has convinced me that this has happened. The whole transition has been poorly planned, badly thought through, and in all likelihood, it's going to be implemented very badly. Certainly the early indications are not promising, and the repercussions for the people that we work with in both the short and the long term will be significant. I think we are potentially at a good moment in order to stop this, considering that we are approaching a period where we may well have a new government quite soon. And I think one of our first priorities must be convince the next Home Secretary to slam the brakes on now before we go over the cliff edge that many people have already alluded to.
Thank you so much, Bethan. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, there's a lot to take in and a lot to think about. And yeah, too many concerns to too many people. Thank you. So next, I'd like to invite the wonderful Reece Colley, who's the casework team manager at our partner organization in West Midlands, the Refugee Migrant Centre. And Reece will also share his organization's experience with the e-visa so far and also the impact on their service users. So Reece.
Hi there. So my name's Reece and I work for the Refugee and Migrant Centre in Birmingham. We have 4 offices in Birmingham, the Black Country, and see around 100 people a day between the 4 office locations. Obviously, we've known this issue's been coming for a while. I didn't know it was 2020 they'd started capping the expiry dates. But it does feel quite ridiculous that effectively we're 6 months away and the vast majority of people can't sign up without using a link that they maybe shouldn't have access to yet. We've had lots of emails from the Home Office asking people to sign up, but again, there's no name on who that's for. We've had follow-up emails saying you still haven't signed up, but we don't know who those people are to even contact them to try and do it. We've noticed recently that decision letters for certain applications come with a link. So refugee indefinite applications, it took us a while to notice because those decision letters are quite generic, and it's only quite far down the bottom of the letter that it says. One issue we've noticed is when you try and set up an account for a child, after you've already set up an account for a parent, you can't use the same phone number and email address, which obviously a very small child doesn't have their own phone and their own email. I don't know if there's a way around it, but we'll have to see. Obviously, because we're a frontline charity, people are already, well, have been coming to us for a while wanting to set it up. And the only guidance we really have is that it will be live to everybody in the summer. But we're in it now, and it's not there. I know they've tendered for a national support organisation, but we again probably won't find out who that is until a lot closer to the deadline. How useful that organisation will be at assisting the number of people that will need it obviously is something we don't know. Obviously with EUSS, we see people every day that still haven't set it up and still haven't been granted. It's unclear how long kind of the grace period will be in terms of how long after New Year's Eve is it permissible that you sign up. I know when I've done it myself, one of the questions is the card already expired? Now obviously that doesn't help people with limited leave, because if their card has already expired, then they're potentially an overstayer if they haven't applied. Again, there's an issue with people that don't have a separate document to kind of link to their account with the right to work checker. Now you put the BRP card number and the date of birth in. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when the BRP cards are gone, there are plenty of people with family visas, for example, that are from countries where obtaining a national document's almost impossible to get. People coming from countries where you might get protection status, but some end up on the family scheme. It's not clear what they're going to be able to do to log back in or to create it. I think it should probably be the email or the phone number, but there's also the possibility that it affects the way that the application forms are going to look and how you do it, because for a while settlement protection applications have had the possibility to, if you're a single applicant, to create an account and then apply through that. But that's had plenty of issues in the fact that you can set up your account and then by the time you get to the point where you need to put the card against the phone, the chip has been in a wallet for 5 years and the chip doesn't register. And then you have to go back and do the old physical application. There's also a concern that for people doing in the family system or refugee indefinite, where for the family visas, you have to do multiple versions of the same application throughout your period of time in the UK. The applications don't necessarily link to your file straight away. I've had people that have done manual right to work checkers where you formally send a request off and it comes back. And the Home Office has no idea that a fee waiver has been submitted in time, for example. A lot of there's a cohort of people with Colley leave. They came back to us much later, and again, they had no idea that they were saying you haven't made an in-time application, and we had to email over the proof that the fee waivers had gone in on time. One thing, it probably affects a very small number of people, but I saw a family on Monday whose leave actually expired on the 31st of the 12th, 2024, which if they had gone to an organization that doesn't provide immigration advice, they may have done the e-visa scheme, left it, and then immediately on New Year's Day 25 become overstayers and theoretically lost access to universal credit and everything else. The Home Office has encouraged people with paper documents for a very long time to move over to biometrics, yet we see people with those documents still. It's unclear kind of how long. A big problem with the no time limit application to get a card is that some people struggle to prove they were actually here. And if you need to do that application in order to get the online system, then that's going to cause problems too. Again, with a similar thing, share codes don't always work, and it's been obviously talked about on here already, but it's unclear how long after an expiry, well, that deadline, if you've still got valid leave, things like universal credit shouldn't stop, housing applications shouldn't stop. But we see every day people that do in-time applications that are being refused work purely because effectively they get told, oh, you need a share code, and you can't generate one if you've done an in-time application. You only have the reference number. Employers don't get that. I have 2 or 3 emails a day emailing HR departments. It's not a good sign. I think the shame of it really is that with a lot of these changes, the burden tends to fall on charities and the voluntary sector. And it's all well and good for the Home Office just to announce the system, not advertise particularly that it's coming, give a very short period of time. Private firms may make some money out of doing it, but it doesn't necessarily seem like it doesn't seem necessary to do, especially in such a short period of time. But other than that, that's all I've got really to say about it.
Well, thank you so much, Reece. Thank you for shedding the light on all these issues and what's coming. Thank you. I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions, but I'd like to move to my next guest, Olivia Ndoti. She's the founder and director of Women Integration Network, and Olivia will share with us the concerns of communities about the new e-visa systems. Olivia, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for hosting this very important discussion. Thankfully, we had the Home Office today. We just agreed on having monthly sessions where they'll be coming to the women's group, and it's open to anyone who's actually has to go through visa checks or just applying for anything with the Home Office. So we had a mixed group today with just a few guys today, but hopefully as we go on after the holidays, we'll have maybe a lot of men coming through, and also maybe international students, which we included today into the program. They are also kind of like looking at, of course, we're going to have issues with whatever people's documents being accessed online, but the system is still being worked on. And advice is basically, from the Home Office's point of view today, was basically to try and not to be taking in calls. We're already having calls, actually. Let me just say the fear from our group. There's mobile numbers that are calling people's phones saying that your visa is actually expiring and it needs to be checked. You need to dial this. So there's these calls which are illegal calls, and most people are not aware of them. So today we're encouraging people to stop the call and block the number immediately, because they're already calling quite a number of people. I've had a few, and when you block it, there's another number that calls you again. So it's already saying your visa is expiring and you need to do this and that. So if you stay online and then take on the advice they're giving you, that means your phone is being hacked. So this is already happening, but people have been advised not to answer any of those calls. There's a major concern from most of our members. Most of the people who are in the asylum process are still going through, even some waiting for ESO classes. There's a few ESO classes that are going through. Not only that, but if they can't do ESO classes and they're not doing IT classes, how are they going to be able to access information online? And most of the members are relying on organizations to support them. So they have to go to different types of organizations to basically ask someone to even read documents for them online, or maybe sign up or take up other appointments. Anything that has become digital is basically seems to be very exclusive to some of their members who are, not that they're actually elderly members, but most people are coming with language barriers, which reading information online is very difficult. Clicking on links which are actually not very reliable is become like very dangerous. We have a WhatsApp chat group. I have like 177 women on my WhatsApp chat group on the women's platform. There's always information being thrown up to say, don't click on this link. My phone just got hacked. Please do this. So the chat group we have is quite very useful, because the women have been advising themselves, and anything at least which is someone knows is aware of is kind of like being blocked. But the fear is for those that are actually got language barriers, how are they going to be accessing most of the information? And I think, as Zoe has actually narrated a lot of issues on, if you're traveling, and then you can't access anything on your phone, and maybe you need to translate, you need Google Translate to find your details, and maybe you're in a queue at the airport, and then there's a queue behind you, and then you kind of like, there's an anxiousness to feel you just want to go through and go home than wait in a queue, because everyone thinks they're going to be detained. So there's that fear, and that fear is going to make a lot of people actually have a lot of mental illness, because it's another trauma that is going to cause a lot of sadness. And should I do this? Should I travel, or should I stay home? But as well, it was someone asked today about, what if my phone is off? What if my phone actually is not working properly? What if I don't have a smartphone? How am I going to get all this accessed? Or I need them to check, or I'm just coming back to the UK. And I'm like, that's a good point. So I kind of like made a joke to say, please tell your children not to go on TikTok when they're traveling, because you're going to need your phone battery when you're coming through back into the country, because you need your battery. And what if I need to do some work? What if I need to read things on my phone and the battery goes off? How am I going to prove my status to the Home Office? What if there's a mistake in the system? So there's a lot of questions being asked, and for sure, it's to me, it's like, it's that unending fear, that fear that never goes away in the system. The hostile just completely goes on and on and on. It's like a lot of issues being heaped up with what we already have. From the Rwanda bill, now we have this issue that people now have to deal with. So people are dealing with a lot. The fear of the Rwanda bill, and then the fear also of the digital access of their status as well. But most of them say, I don't use a smartphone because people can steal my details. So we have a few members that don't even have smartphones. They don't want to use them. And not some because they don't want to use them, but because they just don't have access to good smartphones that they can use as well. But with the Home Office, they're saying they're going to make sure that, you know, these don't happen, which we don't believe. This is also going to be an issue because the Home Office details or NHS have already been hacked already, and there's a lot of issues going on in the system. So that's a big fear to actually confront. I don't have good answers for people in the system, but to say during the campaign that is actually campaigning about e-visas, that, you know, hopefully we can challenge the Home Office, but they've agreed to be coming to our sessions like every month for us to engage with them and tell them the issues that we're facing, and also they can speak to us. So we had a good session today. It was from 10 o'clock until about 2:30. So it was a long session which went on until about 3 o'clock. Thankfully, there was also someone from the enforcement team, because it's a group of Home Office team leaders that are coming from the community engagement team, which I've never heard about until about, I think, 6 months ago, since we started like communicating with them. There's the good thing and the bad thing communicating with the community engagement team. The good thing is that they've been helping our members who are actually very vulnerable. Probably they have health conditions, and the documents have delayed. They've been in the system for a long time. They've been fast tracking these cases that we've referred to them. And we've had so far 3 that have been granted through getting close to them and accessing the documents. We nearly lost one person because she couldn't get the treatment she wanted because she was still in the asylum process. So with the fast tracking with someone from the engagement team, and she was working inside the Home Office, and she managed to get this lady her leave to remain immediately so that she can go on the, I think it was a organ donation, which we were not even sure of, that if you're in the asylum process, you cannot actually get a organ donation. It was shocking. So which means that someone has to die because you can't have that access to organ transplant. And these cases are coming up as well. It's helping us to understand the whole system. But thankfully, we kind of like worked with the doctors to check on this lady's health condition and the Home Office, and she got her leave to remain, and immediately she went on the health treatment, which was very expensive. So the good side is, yes, they've been helping us with people who are very vulnerable, but the bad side is they're completely enforcing that. They are doing these dawn raids, they're going to be removing people, and anyone that's going to be signing up, everything is going to be digital. But most of the people are not happy because they don't have access to even a good computer. They don't have access to broadband. They don't have a broadband in the house, or to prepare for anything when they have to say they're leaving the country. Most people, language barriers is an issue, but also IT skills is a big issue. I think, to me, my recommendation to everybody else would be, we need 1,000 computers in the communities to try and now look at IT skills, that everyone should grasp these IT skills. But not everybody else is going to do that, because it's like you're teaching a grown-up to do something that they don't want to do. And it's also a mental torture when they can actually access things within their own language. But now I think we're teaching another language, which is enforcing English to be, you should learn to read English, because it's the only way you can live in this country. It's the only way you can access your documents. So it's like an open prison to classify it. There's no peace. Everything that goes on within the community is an issue after an issue, and all the campaigning groups that are trying their best. It's good work, but the people facing it actually are not living, I should say. It's just, I'll just say it's surviving day by day. So that's as much, because I think Zoe and Reece, you've also mentioned about the share code. The share code is an issue as well. People have been given permission to work whilst doing the asylum process, but that share code is not being recognized by certain employers. So people have to keep on downloading a share code or sending it by email, thinking that the link they've sent is going to be active, and the link is not active, and they're asking them to bring something else again. It's taken one of our members about 2 weeks to get this share code. And then the limit of that share code is about, I think, 2.5 years. And then when that finishes as well, they have to go back to the lawyer and start asking again for permission to work, and they have to stop working. And meanwhile, because most of them are working for NHS, so NHS will try to get them to say, you need to come back to work, you need to come back to work. NHS is not understanding that the Home Office is actually stopping people to work when there's that time limit of the work permit. But they're getting, just emails going back and forth, like, you need to come to work. And I can't come to work because my work permit has expired. I need to wait for another one to come through. So it's a mental torture for human beings to live like that. And I feel, hopefully, I don't know if there's a way forward, but I think we're all doing amazing work, and hopefully we can try and support when this comes through. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Thank you. Thank you. At least some good news or some communication from the Home Office, and hopefully they will listen and improve the process. Thank you for that. So I am aware of the time, and we still have 2 guest speakers, and after that we'll open. I can see there are lots of questions. We'll try to answer as many as we can. So my next guest is Ramya Jaidev from Windrush Lives. Ramya, are you there? Is Ramya with us?
Hiya. Sorry, I was just turning my video on.
Hello, hi Ramya. Hi. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. And then, you don't need introduction. I think you're here to tell us about the learning from the Windrush scandal. So over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I'll try and keep it really quick. So the first thing to say is most of the people who've spoken before me are either practitioners or caseworkers directly handling applications, claims, appeals, that sort of thing. And my view, or rather the sort of, by view, I don't mean my opinion, but the kind of view in that I have of all of these issues is through the broader lens of Windrush and what happens when some of these kinds of documentation issues are just allowed to fester and spread, and the kind of, how that has knock-on effects for loads and loads of things. And so all of the examples of all of the types of problems that have been talked about have come up with Windrush victims. The really big one, and this is obviously going to happen again for older people, is digital literacy, which I think Olivia talked about, Bethan talked about. So the Home Office appointed an agency called We Are Digital to provide digital application support to Windrush victims in order to enable them to make their applications to the Windrush compensation scheme online, not the original Windrush scheme, which was the one which gave them their documents, but the compensation one. But this gives you a kind of idea of how these things go. There's no information on, certainly no information at the level that I wanted, of what the basis was on which We Are Digital was awarded that. I mean, there's some tender information there, but you really can't push these accountability questions very far with the Home Office, because the second you ask 1 or 2 questions, you find that that data doesn't exist. They don't record these things. They won't give you the answers to this and that. So there's an accountability problem with them in general anyway. So anything where you're trying to get, older people, people who are just not that happy with screens or computers, anything where you're trying to tell them you need to do a complicated thing across a combination of your computer and maybe your phone as well, A, they're not going to want to do it, and B, the practical reality is if there isn't someone there to do it for them, they're just not going to do it because they don't know how to, right? So these are all kind of problems that the hostile environment likes to create for itself. It likes to say, I don't like XYZ, and I'm going to target that by making it impossible for people to achieve whatever the end goal of XYZ is. And that never really works. This is the kind of broader argument they've used for asylum in general anyway, right? People who are desperate will flee. You're not going to change like human reasoning. This is the kind of leverage that, anyway, doesn't matter. But yeah, so technically, the sort of digital, any kind of transition over to that would be very difficult, especially if they haven't, you know, as everyone's pointed out, there's 6 months to the deadline. They've had like up 5 years back this started. So they've had a reasonably long time to try and kind of put the house in order, but they haven't. And I guess the reason for that kind of brings me to my second point, which is they're not interested in doing that kind of thing. Whatever your kind of immigration, so I'm just going to take half a step back there. Immigration is quite an inherently political area of law. I am a practicing lawyer, but I don't practice in immigration, so I tend to have a relative amount of freedom to say certain things which I know my colleagues who practice as immigration lawyers cannot, because they will have client confidentiality issues and so forth. And, you know, there may sometimes be conflicts of interest. But the really important thing about all of these things, of which electronic visas, but also some of the examples that were given, slightly earlier, the decision to decide in 2020 that you were going to phase out BRPs in 2023, when that's not what you've been doing as a standard for those documents. Like, that kind of thing really matters. Like, people rely on consistency and transparency to be able to, you know, document themselves and their own existence. And when you don't have that, it makes it people who have already insecure or threatened status even more insecure and threatened. And it would be unsurprising if an event like this, you know, transitioning everyone over onto one form of documentation, removing the opportunity for any other backup or like any other secondary thing, it would be really surprising to me if an event like this didn't end up with a load of people suddenly discovering that they don't have the right to be here, or actually they're going to be deported, or their children or grandchildren don't have the right to be here. And that's the real problem. Every sort of minute, second, year that we allow this hostile environment thinking to go on, we are seeding problems for ourselves 20 and 30 years down, you know, 20 and 30 years down the line. So when we think about tackling each of these individual policies, whether it's EUSS, whether it's electronic visas, whether it's Windrush compensation, I think one of the things that is helpful and is starting to happen is a joined up view of how the Home Office is making life difficult for certain types of people. And I think sometimes trying to think of the question in that way can put the distance between saying, right, in practice, I'm going to challenge X, Y, and Z with a judicial review. But actually, as an underlying point, this whole system, there's something really wrong at the core of this. And without kind of thinking about and addressing that, we're always going to be more limited in terms of the impact that we can have on the people who are ultimately affected by these types of policies. And that's really all I want to say.
Thank you so much, Ramya. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'll move now swiftly to, last but not least, David Forbes from Lifeline Options, and also, of course, on the steering group, one of the steering group members of the Migrant Voice visa fees campaigns. So David will tell us, will speak a little bit more, maybe about the potential challenges of the e-visa implementation. David.
Well, I've got a fairly straightforward proposal here, because we're dealing with people who have to make a huge number of applications, 4 in principle with a huge amount of fees and so on, but many more in practice, because practically everybody has to apply for fee waivers. So you can double that 4 to maybe 8 over the 10 years, and more still because their children grow up and they have to apply for nationality when they get to 10 if they were born here. And then they are also entitled to a fee waiver thanks to the valiant work of many of our colleagues here. So there's a huge number of applications to do. Therefore, the question about status arises more times than for any other category of people. So talking about status certainty and loss of status certainty, I just want to make a huge, huge cheer for Ramphel, who are probably here somewhere, with their wonderful recent victory in the High Court on the duty of the Home Office to provide a digital certification. Oddly enough, they won the case for digital, not for paper ones, but we have to start somewhere. But the principle of having a digital or a certificate of application for everybody who has an application underway is absolutely vital. And I would suggest that it must apply also to people who have entered the fee waiver application, which is considered as a substantive application. Because at the moment, a fee waiver application can take 6, 7, 8 months. So it's just like any other application. So the important thing is that people should be able to demonstrate their status. And the question of whether it is a certificate of application or an e-visa may be, in a sense, academic. What about people whose status is running out on the 15th of December? Their card is expiring, and they have to enter a fee waiver. How are they going to change their card to an e-visa? They will have to have what Ramphel has just won for us, a digital certificate of application, because they'll have to be tided over well into 2025. And of course, as may have been mentioned already, those of us who are supposed to be helping and getting some funding for giving that help, if we get the contract, if we've applied, it runs from September 24 to August 2025. So is this telling us something? Is this telling us that, in fact, everybody will need to have either certificate of application or some other certification? And it seems as it's going to be digital. Old as we may be, we can't stop progress, perhaps. But let's have a digital certificate of application. So what I'm proposing is that what should happen now is that the e-certificate of application certifying continuing rights should be delivered during every biometric appointment immediately. Once you've got one, and if you've managed to avoid paying the awful soprasteria along the way. Right? So why not do it like that? So at the point when people appear for their biometric appointments, because most of them don't have access to the alternative ID process, they should be issued with a digital either certificate of application or a well, basically, I think at the biometric stage, the certificate of application, which would be co-extensive with the e-visa. So I would suggest that perhaps we should all call for this now. Okay, this may cost the Home Office more. There's lots of talk about the cost to the taxpayer, but of course, many of our clients, or nearly all of them, are taxpayers and also massive fee payers as well. Already they have costs of travel, UK VCAS fees to soprasteria if they can't find a free appointment, so they're going to biometrics, photo booth charges if they're having to upload photographs for various purposes. So our users are the taxpayers that we should be thinking of. Also, our users, like everybody else, have human rights, and I think the whole thing should be seen through a human rights focus, so that the process should be challengeable under private life or human rights as well as the statuses and the outcomes. So I think that's about all I want to say. I'm trying to throw in that extra thing, join up the certificates of application with the digital certificates of application. Sorry, I prefer them to be a stamp or whatever they are, with the e-visas or the stickers or whatever it is. Let's have for both a status validation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe, Monique, Bethan, Reece, Olivia, Ramya, and David. And thank you everyone for attending this evening. And please do share your experiences with us and with the partner organizations. So all of us, we are able to try to do something to try to influence or improve the process to make everybody's life easier.